Welcome, guys. Glad you're here with us joining in today. We're in a series called Fearless. And what we're learning about these days is how to overcome a tendency that really all of us have to live our lives based on the fears that we all have. And I don't know if many of us would want to admit this, but the truth is we all have some regrets. And if you trace those regrets back, most likely you can trace your regrets back to a decision that you made, or maybe a decision that you know you should have made and you didn't make it, and you can trace that decision back to a moment when you were just afraid. And now the regrets that you and we all live with, we can trace them back, and most likely they come from a moment of fear. It goes like this. I'm afraid I might lose him or her as a friend, and so I don't speak the truth even though I know I ought to say something, much like seen in that video you just watched. I'm afraid I might make her mad, so I don't confront her even though I know she's about to make a huge mistake, and I just don't say anything. Or I'm afraid something might happen to my kids, and so I become this overprotective parent. I can't let my kids grow and develop and learn the way they should. I'm just so afraid. Or I'm afraid I won't be good enough, or I'm afraid that people won't like me if I do that thing or try that thing, so I'm just not even going to try it. Or I'm afraid of what the doctor might tell me, so I'm not going to make that appointment. Or I'm afraid of being poor. And so I hoard and I save and I work hard, and my emotions go up and down with the stock market. Or I'm afraid I might look like I'm poor, so I go out and spend money that I don't have. And see, at the end of every one of those stories is a regret. And I wish I would have, or and I wish I wouldn't have. And if I just stood up in the face of my fear, I wouldn't have that regret. Things would be different. See, this is why fear is so powerful. Fear will cause you to lose perspective on reality. See, when we lose perspective and we start reacting and making decisions based on the emotions we feel rather than what we know to be true, see, when you're in the middle of an emotional situation, you're afraid or you're worried, isn't it true that you can't really see anything else except the thing in front of you, the moment, or the emotion that's attached to that moment? I mean, how many times have you walked around with a particular situation and it's on your mind, and no matter how hard you try to not think about it, you can't. You can't think about anything else. Like you get a bad diagnosis, and it causes all kinds of fear and worry in you. And so now everything you think, everything you say, and everything you do, the decisions you make after that, all run through the filter of that emotion or that thought or that fear. You can't help it. It's just the way it is. Everything you think, feel, and do runs through the filter of that emotion and that fear. Or maybe you lose someone and you have a devastating grief, and now you're worried about the future. You have fear over what's coming down the road. And now that clouds every thought until you can't think about anything else. You're running everything through that filter, and the emotion of it affects everything you think and you say. You start going through a rough patch with somebody that you're in a relationship with, and you get so worried and so afraid, I might lose this person. And now everything you say, everything you hear that person say gets run through that filter, that emotion. And now you're hypersensitive about everything. You think everything ties back to your fear, and you start making decisions based on that fear. And here's what happens. You wind up ruining the relationship, which is the one thing you were afraid of in the first place. And it becomes like this self-fulfilling prophecy. My point is this. Fear will cause you to lose perspective on reality, because when you're scared, you can't see anything but the problem, and you can't see anything but the emotion attached to the problem. And because you can't see anything else, you wind up making a bad decision. But see, here's what I want to encourage you with today, and what I want us to talk about. As you read the Bible, as you get to know God, and as you get to know how God works through the lives of people, you realize something. And it's the key thing I want you to hang on to today. And here it is. You might want to write this down. The moment of your greatest fear, the moment of your greatest fear is often God's greatest opportunity to do something amazing in your life. I'll say it again. The moment of your greatest fear can often be God's greatest opportunity to do something great in your life. If, now this is a big if though, if you don't lose perspective. See, maybe you're not a Bible person, but here's what I want to challenge you. Go through your Bible sometime and just read the stories of the men and the women who God chose to use in this world and do amazing things through. And you look at those stories, and here's what you'll find. You can trace back the moment God began to interact with this person, and you'll find that there was a moment of fear. A moment where there was uncertainty, there was worry, and fear had to be overcome in order for that great thing to come about. It happens every single time. Nearly every single one of their stories starts with fear. Talk to someone in your life who has one of those, what I call God stories. You know what I mean by that. It's this moment where somebody says, I was losing hope, I was hopeless, and I was going down fast. Or I'd made a mess of my life, or I was all alone and things were bad. But then God stepped in, and look at what God did in my life, and look at the amazing things, and look how things change. You ask a person who has a story like that, and you just ask them this question. At any point in that time, were you fearful of anything? Were you worried about anything? I guarantee you every single one of them will say, oh yeah. There was a moment when I was scared. I was worried. I didn't know what was coming next. And my point is, the moment of that great fear that you have is often the moment where God has the greatest opportunity to do something in your life. If you just don't lose perspective on what's going on. If you don't make a really dumb decision out of the fear. Something you'll regret later on. And today, here's what I want us to do. We're going to look at a story from the Bible. And it's going to be a story that pretty much everybody here is going to know. Even if you didn't grow up in church, you've probably heard this story. In fact, it ranks at probably the top of everybody's list of favorite Bible stories. And we're going to walk through it because I think this story illustrates this truth better than just about anything that I know of. It's the story of David and Goliath. Now, you may have heard us say this around here before, but the Bible's divided into Old and New Testament, the older part and the newer part. And in the Old Testament, basically what you've got is the history of a nation called Israel. And God has chosen, for whatever reason, just because he wanted to build up this nation in order to reveal himself and what he's like to the world. God chooses to work through the nation of Israel to show the world who he is. And there's a culture there. There's sometimes some things that, honestly, you wouldn't quite be too proud of. But God still works within that culture, within that time in history, to show the world who he is and what he's like. And during this particular time in history, God is choosing to use the power, to show his power to the world, mainly through military battles, because that's what spoke most loudly to their culture. And so through a series of military victories, God is showing the world around how powerful he is and who he is and what he's like through his support of the nation of Israel. Now, there's one enemy that just keeps coming back into the picture and into the story, and it's the Philistines, if you've ever read the stories. But that's what this story is all about. In fact, we're going to pick it up in a book called 1 Samuel chapter 17. It starts like this. It says, the Philistines now mustered their army for battle and camped between Soko in Judah and Azekah in Ephes Dammim, which is easy for me to say. King Saul countered by gathering his Israelite troops near the valley of Elah. So the Philistines and Israelites faced each other on opposite hills with the valley between them. So there's the scene. You've got the Israelites up on one hill, you got the Philistines on the other hill, and there's this huge valley in between, and that's most likely where the battle is going to take place. Now, the Philistines are an interesting group. They're from Philistia, of course, but they're this really small, insignificant country, and you wouldn't think they'd have a whole lot of power and a whole lot of clout, but they do. And the reason is, at that time in history, they had become experts at working with metal, better than anybody anywhere around. And so because of that, they had all the best tools, they had all the best weapons. In fact, in their country, they didn't really have to build up livestock and sow a lot of seed and grow a lot of crops, because if they ever wanted something, they just sort of cross over the lines and invade a country, and they just go take it because they could. Not because they were big, but because they were powerful. They had the best weapons. And so that's what's happening here. They're heading over into Israel. They're going to go to war, pick a fight, and they're going to take what they need from the Israelite nation. Verse 4. Then Goliath, a Philistine champion from Gath, came out of the Philistine ranks to face the forces of Israel. He was over 9 feet tall. He wore a bronze helmet. His bronze coat of mail weighed 125 pounds. He also wore bronze leg armor. And he carried a bronze javelin on his shoulder. The shaft of his spear was as heavy and thick as a weaver's beam, tipped with an iron spearhead that weighed 15 pounds. His armor-bearer walked ahead of him, carrying his shield. Goliath stood and shouted a taunt across to the Israelites. "Why are you all coming out to fight?" he called. "I'm the Philistine champion, but you are only the servants of Saul. So choose one man to come down here and fight me, and if he kills me, we'll be your slaves. But if I kill him, then you'll be our slaves." Now, you just need to know this wasn't an uncommon kind of thing in that day, but it is kind of pretty bold when you consider the circumstances. See, a lot of times in that time and in that culture, two armies would go to war, and they'd meet out in the battlefield, and sometimes they'd have a dispute over something small, maybe over who's going to drink out of a certain well. And when there was a small dispute, they would do something like this. They'd call one or two people out of the army, and they'd get down in the middle, and they'd fight to the death. And whoever won, well, that's who got to drink from the well, or who got to take that small little territory, or that small victory. It was pretty common. But in this instance, it wasn't very common, because you almost never put one guy up and put the whole nation at stake, the conquering of a whole nation. That just didn't happen very often. So what Goliath is doing is he's deliberately taunting the Israelites. I mean, this is a big deal. Because, see, for them, for the Philistines, this is worth the risk. I mean, it'd be worth the risk if you had the 9-foot dude on your team. I mean, it's no contest. Choose one guy. It doesn't matter who you choose. Our guy's going to beat your guy. And they're going to win, and they know it. But Israel, they're in a tough spot. See, no matter what they decide, they're probably going to lose. Because, see, if they accept this challenge and they put the whole country on one man to try and save the lives of all these other people, and then they do lose, which they probably would, and then you go back home and you tell the whole country, well, we lost because we put this one guy in the battle, and they're going to say, what are you thinking? But now if they refuse the challenge, and they send the whole army down there, and then they run the risk of losing, and they lose then, well, then everybody back home is going to say, well, why did you risk the whole army? Why did you put our sons and our fathers in danger, and you still ended up losing? So they're sort of in a no-win situation. Goliath says, "I defy the armies of Israel today. Send me a man who will fight me." And when Saul and the Israelites heard this, they were terrified and deeply shaken. There it is. There's the fear. And this is where King Saul and all of the other Israelites, I believe, make their first mistake. And it's a mistake in their thinking. They lose perspective on the situation that they're in, and here's how they do it. They allowed Goliath to completely frame and define the situation or the issue. Notice what Goliath says to them. He starts out and he says, "You're just servants of Saul." Later on he says, "I defy the armies of Israel." See, that's very important language that he's using there. Goliath is simply saying, well, this conflict, this is about armies, this is about kings, this is about rulers, this is about nations. Goliath says, I come against Israel. I come against Saul and his army. And every Israelite hearing him, they believe him. They believe everything he says. They believe, wow, he's right. This is our problem. This is between our army and Goliath's army. And that's their perspective. The mistake that they made is they never once factored in God. Never once did they factor God into the equation. And see, when you don't factor God into the equation, then there's only one question that matters. And the question is this: can we handle this? Can I handle the situation that is right in front of me? Can I handle what's about to happen? And if you ask that question and you find that the answer is no, well, then you got a lot to be afraid of. But see, isn't that what we do? See, we lose perspective and we start asking that question. Do I have the ability to handle this? Do I have the ability to forgive him? Do I have the power to survive this situation? Do I have the willpower to quit whatever it is I'm quitting? And as soon as we factor God out and we start asking those kind of questions, fear takes over. And why wouldn't it? And when fear takes over, we react based on the emotion of it, the fear of it, and everything goes down from there. And as a result, it's all a result of factoring God out. Now, a lot of you are thinking, well, I don't factor God out because I pray when I'm afraid. And here's what I would say to you. Of course you do. Everybody prays when they're afraid. I mean, we all pray. In fact, you probably don't even have to believe in God to start praying when you're scared about something, because when you're scared, oh boy, do you pray. But the difference is what you pray. See, when you get scared, you pray. All of us pray. But what do you pray? You pray, God fix it. God change it. God change him. God change her. God, I know what you need to do, and let me tell you what you need to do. And yeah, I know I ain't talked to you in years, but listen, I'm scared, and this is what needs to happen. So can you get about doing what needs to happen? And by the way, I kind of need it now. And my point is, that's the wrong perspective. And nobody in this story has the right perspective in order to defeat Goliath. All they had was their fear, their emotion, and their desperation. Because see, again, to them, Goliath is their problem. And they didn't have the ability to solve their problem. But their perspective is about to get changed. Now, David was the son of a man named Jesse, an Ephrathite from Bethlehem in the land of Judah. Jesse was an old man at that time, and he had 8 sons. Jesse's 3 oldest sons, Eliab, Abinadab, and Shimea, had already joined Saul's army to fight the Philistines. David was the youngest son. David's 3 oldest brothers stayed with Saul's army, but David went back and forth so he could help his father with the sheep in Bethlehem. Here's the point I want to make to you. For 40 days, every morning and every evening, the Philistine champion, Goliath, strutted in front of the Israelite army. Can you imagine that? Goliath comes out twice a day for 40 days, and not one person in the army ever moves. Nobody. For 40 days. Think about that. That's a long time to be frozen in fear, to be just stuck, to be just immobilized by what you're afraid of. Imagine how miserable these guys are in this army. And then here's this kid, David. He's too young to go to war. He's back home taking care of his father's sheep. And the text says his father sends him out to the battlefield. He says, hey, take this food to your brothers, go check on them, make sure they're okay, and then come back to me. So David left the sheep with another shepherd and set out early in the morning with the gifts, as Jesse had directed him. He arrived at the camp just as the Israelite army was leaving for the battlefield with shouts and battle cries. Soon the Israelite and Philistine forces stood facing each other, army against army. So there they are on the hill again. David left his things with the keeper of supplies, and he hurried out to the ranks to greet his brothers. As he was talking with them, Goliath, the champion from Gath, came out from the Philistine ranks. Then David heard him shout his usual taunt to the army of Israel. And as soon as the Israelite army saw him, they began to run away in fright. I love that part that says, and David heard him. See, this is like a new, fresh set of ears. Think about it. 80 times they'd heard this guy every morning, every night for 40 days come out and give this same speech. They'd all heard it before. All the guys in the army had heard it before. And for the first time, David hears it. And I can imagine this kid, he's standing there and he's listening to everything Goliath is telling him because he hadn't heard it before. And he's listening and he gets to the end of his speech and he turns around and he goes, you guys hear what he's saying? Where'd everybody go? Because they're all tucked tail and ran. Because remember, they still see Goliath as their problem. And they know that they don't have what it takes to handle their problem. So they're afraid, and they run. Have you seen the giant? The men asked. He comes out every day to defy Israel. The king has offered a huge reward to anyone who kills him. He'll give that man one of his daughters for a wife. And the man's entire family will be exempted from paying taxes. Now, this is the part in the story, to me, it's just funny. I mean, King Saul has resorted to bribing his guys to go out and fight this giant, and none of them will budge. So it's like he comes out one day, he says, all right, whoever go fight this guy, he says, I'll give him a big reward. I'll give you gobs and gobs of money. Any takers? Nobody. Okay. I'll give you gobs and gobs of money, and I'll give you my daughter. Anybody? Don't even want to see a picture. Okay. Well, I'll give you the money, I'll give you my daughter, and nobody in your family will ever have to pay taxes again. Nobody. Man, I thought the taxes would get them. It's just funny to me. I mean, you would have thought somebody would at least said, I'll take a shot at it. That's a pretty big deal. But again, notice what they say in that last verse we just read. Goliath, it says, comes out to defy who? Israel. Again, to them, this is still their problem. They're saying he's against us. Their perspective is still the same. But you'll notice something. David has a different perspective. David asked the soldiers standing nearby, "What will a man get for killing this Philistine and ending his defiance of Israel? Who is this pagan Philistine anyway, that he is allowed to defy the armies of the living God?" And there it is. That's the question that changes everything. Who is this Philistine who defies the armies of the living God? See, David doesn't view Goliath as his problem. He doesn't see him as King Saul's problem. He doesn't see it as Israel's problem. He says this is God's problem. Because David knew what all the others had forgotten. Israel was God's chosen people. He had said, "You're going to be my light to all the surrounding nations." And he knew God was really fond of showing his power to the world whenever his people, his nation, were especially fearful, when they were at their weakest, and when they were at their most afraid. He knew that throughout history, Israel's fear, Israel's weakness, was the moment when God often used it as his greatest opportunity to show the world exactly who he was. And David had the perspective to go on and say, this is not our problem. This is God's problem. And all God needs is for somebody to step up and say, I'll be the who. I'll be the guy that you can use. God, work through me. And when that happens, David says, God's going to show up. And he's going to show how he's going to do this. So really, this is not even a problem, guys. This is an opportunity. This is an opportunity for God to do something unusual and something profound and something great. Now, time out right there. I just want to talk to you about one thing. If you're a Christ follower, can I just remind you of something? That you and me, Christ followers, we're just like Israel. You belong to God. The Bible says you have been bought at a high price, and the price was the life of God's own Son. And God now wants to show the world who he is through you. He wants to show the world his compassion and his power and his love through your life. And there's nothing in this life that comes at you or into your life that hasn't passed through the hand of your Heavenly Father. See, every single thing that causes you fear or worry or grief or pain or trial, God's not shocked by it. God wasn't surprised by it. He let it happen. He allowed you to encounter that situation, not because he doesn't love you, not because he's forgotten you, not because he wants to punish you or he's mad at you, but because he wants to do something through your life that would never have been accomplished unless you stare down the source of your fear. And instead of saying, I have a problem, say, God, we have a problem. And on my own, I don't think I can do this. I don't have the ability to handle it. But God, this is yours now. This is your opportunity. Work something extraordinary through my life. I trust you. And now you use this however you see fit. And you show your love and your power and your glory to everybody else who's watching. This is yours. See, this is why the Bible teaches that we know in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. What shall we say in response to all these things that cause us fear? If God's for us, then who can be against us? See, as a child of God, you and me, we can say with confidence, God, you allowed this situation to happen for a reason. There's a purpose, and whatever you decide to do, whether you decide to change the circumstance or whether you don't, I give you permission to work through me and in me to accomplish whatever purpose you have for this moment. And when you say that to God, and you truly begin to believe it, what room is there for fear? Because he's for you. Who can be against you? No matter what happens, he'll take that thing, that problem, that circumstance, that thing that's causing you fear, and he'll use it for his glory. Now, let me say one other thing. Maybe you're here today and you wouldn't call yourself a Christ follower. You're still figuring that whole thing out, or maybe you're just here because you showed up with somebody to make them happy, and you're not really into this God thing. And the truth is, when you face a fear in your life, you don't factor God into it because you can't, and you don't plan to. That's just the way you handle things. And I just say you're in the right place. This is a good place to come and learn and investigate. But I would say this to you. You know, the root of every fear is simply that belief that I can't handle everything on my own. I mean, think about it. The root of all fear is simply that. I mean, I can't handle this. And so we get fearful. And if you're not able to factor God into your fear, here's all I can say to you. Your best bet is you need to get up every morning, you need to look yourself in the mirror, and you need to somehow figure out a way to convince yourself that you can handle it. I mean, you just work up whatever you need to work up. You just trust and trust more in your abilities and your talent and whatever else that you have to handle everything that comes your way. Because that's really your only shot at handling this whole fear thing is you got to build yourself up. You got to get stronger and more resilient, and you just need to work on that if you can't factor God into it. But I will say this, if there ever comes a day and you do look into that mirror one day and you say to yourself, I can't handle this on my own, then listen, you're a perfect candidate for the grace and the power of God. Jesus said, if you'll come to me, all of you who can't handle it on your own, I'll handle it. I'll take that load for you. Because when you finally say, God, I can't handle this, but you know what? This is your opportunity to do something great in my life, so I'm going to step back and I'm going to obey you, and I'm going to allow you to do something. That's when you see the grace and the power of God in your life. Our fear is God's greatest opportunity if we don't lose the perspective that we have to have on our fear. Back to the story. Don't worry about this Philistine, David says to King Saul. I'll go fight him. Saul says, don't be ridiculous. There's no way you can fight this Philistine and possibly win. You're just a boy. He's been a man of war since his youth. But David persisted. He says, I've been taking care of my father's sheep and goats. And when a lion or a bear comes to steal a lamb from the flock, I go after it with my club, and I rescue the lamb from its mouth. Pretty confident guy, isn't he? If the animal turns on me, I catch it by the jaw and I club it to death. I've done this to lions and bears, and you know what? I'll do this to this pagan Philistine too, for he has defied the armies of the living God. And the Lord who rescued me from the claws of the lion and the bear, he'll rescue me from this Philistine. Saul finally consents. All right, go ahead, and may the Lord be with you. You're going to need all the help you can get. See, here's what's driving David's perspective on this. When you've stood in the face of your fears with God, and when you've seen God turn your fear into an opportunity, you get bold. You get more and more unafraid. You get like scary brave. Because when you know that you belong to God and there is no situation that he can't use and pull you through, you get to the point where you think, what is there to be afraid of? And see, some of you I'm talking to, you already know this. Because you can go back 5, 10, 20 years in your past, and you can look at that situation, that moment, that thing that you thought, I am never going to get through this. I don't know how I'm going to make it through this. I am so scared right now, I can't even think. And you think back to that moment, and you fast forward to where you are today, and for some of you, it's almost hard for you to remember what that fear was about because now you see it in a completely different light, don't you? I mean, some of you struggle to even remember what it was because it's a distant memory. And by God's grace, by God's power, here you are. And God worked through your life, and he's still working through your life. He's been with you the whole time. My point is, the more you do this, the more you gain perspective, and the more you will gain confidence just like David did. That's how David got so confident. So he picks up 5 smooth stones from a stream. He puts them in his shepherd's bag. And then, armed only with his shepherd's staff and sling, he started across the valley to fight the Philistine. Goliath walked out toward David with his shield bearer ahead of him, sneering in contempt at this ruddy-faced boy. Am I a dog, he roared at David, that you're coming at me with a stick? And he cursed David by the name of his gods. Come over here. I'm going to give your flesh to the birds and wild animals. And this time, David gets to share his perspective on the situation with Goliath. This is my favorite part of the story. David replied to the Philistine, you come to me with sword, spear, and javelin. I come to you in the name of the Lord of heaven's armies, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. See, again, it's not about armies for David. Today, the Lord will conquer you, and I will kill you and cut off your head. And then I will give the bodies of your men to the birds and wild animals. And the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. See, he knew what this was about. And everyone assembled here will know that the Lord rescues his people, not with a sword or with a spear, but this is the Lord's battle, and he will give you to us. And you know how the story ends. God does what only God can do. And that day, everybody there and the world around watching knew God was God, because David had enough perspective to know this is not about me. This is not about a giant. This is not about a nation. This is about God. So what do you fear today? Last week we did a lot of work on identifying our greatest fear. If you weren't here, I suggest you listen to that message. But what is it that you're scared of? Right here where you sit, what are you most afraid of? Can I just say to you, that thing, that fear, it's God's greatest opportunity to work in your life if you will just keep your perspective. If you'll just give him the permission to work in your life. Stop taking things in your own hands. Stop worrying over whether you have the ability to handle it. That is not the issue. Yeah, but what if I fail? What if I get knocked down? What if my fear becomes reality? See, there it is. Whatever that is that you just thought about and tried to argue with me in your mind, that is what I'm talking about. That's God's best opportunity. Do you believe God can work through that thing, that fear, that situation to show himself strong through you? Or are you just afraid to trust him? See, I don't know this for sure, but I'm pretty confident that David, when he walked onto that battlefield that day and he had those rocks in his pouch and he had that one sling, I just believe that in his mind, he believed, he was confident, he was trusting God would get him through, but I also believe that David believed in his heart that even if God doesn't rescue me, even if I don't get out of this alive, God is still with me, God is still for me, and God will still get the glory out of this. David knew he was right in the middle of God's plan, and so he was confident that God will bring him through, but even if he didn't, God's purpose was going to be accomplished no matter what the outcome, because he knew God's for me. Who can be against me? Listen, some of you are here today and you've got this mountain of fear and you're facing it right now, and I don't want you to think that I'm downplaying that. I'm not minimizing your fear. Some of you are facing fears that I've never faced and never will face, and I know if I heard your story, none of us would ever blame you for staying up all night and worrying yourself to death. But I do want to challenge you with one thing. This week, I want you to change your perspective from where you are now in relation to your fear. I'm going to ask you to just simply do this, one thing. Change the way you pray about your fear. Because, see, all of us are praying about it, but the truth is, most of us pray the same thing. When we're scared, we pray, God help me. God change this. God change her. God change him. God get me out of this. That's what we pray. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with those prayers. You should pray that. But I'm challenging you this week to change your prayer from God help, help, help to God use, use, use. God, use this situation. Use this fear for your purpose, for your glory. This is no longer my problem. This is your problem. On the back of your connection card today, I want you to take this, and there's a next step on here that I'm challenging you to take, and it says, I'm going to pray that prayer. God, use this situation. Use my fear for your purpose. Would you check that box and let us know? Because when you do, here's what happens. We join with you in that prayer. We support you by praying on your behalf all week long. Our teams get these, and they pray over every single one of them. We want to do that for you. Maybe you say, I don't know if I can pray that yet, and that's okay. But would you at least investigate changing your perspective, viewing your fear from a different perspective, and not getting so wrapped up in the emotion of it, and allowing God to be factored into it? Maybe you want to take that step. Or maybe today you can say, all I can do is just, I can promise I'll come back. That's great. You keep coming back and you keep investigating this, and let's dive more fully into this next week, and let's not let our fear rule over our lives, but allow God to be factored in. Whatever step you need to take, I pray you'll take it, and you'll just turn this in to the offering when it comes by, and allow us to partner with you and to pray with you this week. Let's bow right now for prayer. God, I'm thankful for so many stories that you have told through so many different lives, both in your word and, God, just in the people around us, where you've shown up and you've done amazing things when we face down some fearful situations. God, I pray that today we will change our perspective, that we will not see our problems for the fear that they create in us, but we'll see them as opportunities for you to get glory from it, to use us, to work through our lives, to show exactly who you are, your love and your grace and your power. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.